So thanks everyone for coming to this panel. We're going to talk about social media marketing today, and we have a pretty good group of people here to talk as well. My name is Mike Arrington. I'm the founder of a blog called TechCrunch. I'm Stanford Law School 95, although all my friends and roommates were business students because you guys were a lot cooler than the law students. So I like coming back here as often as I can and speaking and seeing all the companies that you guys tend to start. How many people here are actually students or former students at Stanford? So everybody, almost. Okay, great. No. And what do you do?
I'm here as an entrepreneur.
But you didn't go to Stanford?
No, I didn't.
Did you go to Berkeley?
No.
Okay.
There's an accent there.
So we have a bit of time here, and a big part of this will be audience participation. I especially want to hear about those of you who have your own companies and have thought about these issues and how you've dealt with them. I'd like the panel to each person introduce themselves. Claire, on the end, also wrote a book, and we're going to talk about the book quite a bit. And I got one copy, but there's one more copy. And the other copy is going to go to the person that asked it, Lane. Yes, yeah. No, Lane, you can share mine, or you could buy one yourself. But whoever asks the best question, sort of the best conversational topic at the end, as decided by Claire and me. So,
Hopefully we agree.
yeah, if we don't, it'll be interesting. So,
Yeah.
Julio, you want to start?
Yeah, so I'm Julio Vasconcelos, GSP 07.
It's Julio, not Julio.
Yeah.
Julio.
So, actually, originally Brazilian, so it's Portuguese rather than Spanish. That's the difference. But GSP 07, work at Experience Project. For those of you not familiar with the site, we are a community where people share the life experiences that matter the most to them. And through that portfolio of experiences and interests, meet other people that are similar to them, and are able to form connections with new people that they may have wanted to meet, but maybe never had the opportunity to meet. We've been around for about 2.5 years now. I joined the company a couple months into it, sort of as the first token business guy, responsible for marketing, business development, a lot of the product work, a lot of the operations, and definitely have a lot of experience using social media for driving traffic, users, as well as just engaging our users and making them come back.
Adam Zabar, I'm CEO of Tap 11. We're a new service that provides real-time business intelligence for major enterprises and marketing companies, basically providing them the best analytic and CRM tools to monitor and grow their audience. On Twitter, we'll be launching in about 2 weeks with about 100 enterprise and major brands going into a private trial.
My name's Lane Becker. I'm the founder, and I don't know what my title is this week, of a company called Get Satisfaction. We build customer service communities for brands and companies. Basically, the idea is you take the best of online forums and the best of sort of customer service software, trouble ticketing software. You put those together into an environment where your customers can go ahead and solve problems for each other in a way that can actually be tied back and integrated into your existing customer service system, so you can actually get a sense of how well it's working, the degree to which your problems are getting resolved, the degree to which people are sharing ideas with each other that are valuable to your organization. And the net result is happier customers and spending a lot less money on customer service.
My name's Claire Shai, and Stanford 04 undergrad, CS and Econ 05 CS Masters, and I'm currently CEO and founder of Hearsay Labs. We develop Facebook applications for small businesses to sell to their customers across social networks. I'm also the author of The Facebook Era, which is being used at classes here and a number of other schools, so it's great to be here. And before that, I worked at Google and Salesforce and also developed an early Facebook application called FaceForce that integrates Facebook with Salesforce CRM.
And you're going into the second edition of it, right?
Yes.
When? April?
July.
July. Cool. I thought I'd start by sharing some data with you guys about TechCrunch and where we get some of our traffic. And because part of what we're talking about here is traffic, and part of what we're talking about here is branding, I think. I'm actually not even sure what period. Oh, it's September to February. I just had somebody pull this right before I left. We had 48 million visits on one of our sites, and Google search traffic sent 29% of that. Twitter sent 3.28% of that. Dig was 3.18% of that. Facebook was 1.2 million, so it's about 2.75%. StumbleUpon 800,000. You see that combined, we're up in the sort of 10% range, a little higher from major social media sites. And we've also found that these users tend to be a lot more engaging than Google. So the 10% that comes from Twitter, Facebook, StumbleUpon, and Dig are far more valuable to us than the 30% that come from Google search. And I think that's a big part of why Google has launched Buzz recently. Not only is the total traffic starting to get really high, referring traffic, and starting to compete with Google search, I think that they also are concerned that social media tends to send very high quality traffic around the internet. What do you guys think about this topic in general? And let me start off with one question, you can jump in. The first thing we're talking about, and Lane, you're gonna have a lot of opinions on this. The first thing I think of when I start thinking about building a presence on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere else and get satisfaction is brand decentralization and sort of loss of control of a place where my brand is under my control. How big of a problem is that, and how do people deal with it?
So, can I swear here?
Yes.
I sort of feel like that's a bullshit question. I mean, no. I mean, I read that. I just because I don't think it's
right,
true.
No, wait, no, hold on. Who in here has a brand that they control beside, like they have their own company, something like that? Raise your hand. Okay, now leave your hand up if you feel like this is an issue that you need to deal with, like giving get satisfaction your brand, putting on Facebook where you're not in control of the tools and things like that. So everybody keep their hand up. So every single person agreed with me.
But I just don't. But they're not up. They're not up on the panel. I don't. I mean, when you look at the direction that the tools are going, they're not going in the direction of giving more and more control to the centralizing force. They're all going in the direction of giving more and more control to the companies that they are trying to get to invest in their platforms, right? I mean, what is Facebook's fan page except really an attempt to basically turn over control of the Facebook environment to the company that wants to control its customers' experience in that environment? I mean, I'm not saying they're turning it over completely, but if you look at the way that they're selling, that's how they're making money.
Do they allow data exports?
I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm simply saying.
What parts of it are good? Because they don't allow data exports. They don't allow one-on-one communication. They don't allow much of anything.
Well,
right?
no, that's not necessarily
And when you buy ads,
true.
they encourage
So-
you to send the ads pointing to that Facebook page, right?
So, okay, so on the question of data export, right?
Yeah.
So Get Satisfaction we're basically launching a Facebook version of Get Satisfaction for pages in the next couple of weeks. They're going to kill me for giving that away.
A Facebook version of Get.
Yeah, so basically embedded in your Facebook fan page, you can take Get Satisfaction
Oh, great.
and put it in there. And, man, my CEO is going to shoot me in the face when I get back.
Is that
And,
going to be? Is that Flash, or what? Are you just doing it through a deal with Facebook, or what?
No, it's done via the API. It's done
Using
via,
the Facebook
it's-
API.
No, it's built on top of our API, but it's
Okay.
a Facebook application.
Okay, just getting the
So,
details.
so the customers, yeah, I know. So the customers, whatever. I've gone into the pool. So, the point is simply that data export is. I just think I think it's a more complicated situation, or I think that it is a difficult situation right now. But in order for brands to be happy, and brands are the way that people spend money inside Facebook, in order for those brands to be happy, I think there is just going to be more negotiation over time. So I just think it's a bullshit question because it's just a negotiation inside a new environment. I mean, there are a lot of different environments in which brands have to participate, and this is just another one of them.
All right, do the other panelists object to the question as well?
Don't object. I guess one of the maybe a slightly different way to look at it as well is trying to think about as the brands start to have brand ambassadors. And for example, Best Buy signed up 2,500 people to be volunteers to speak on their behalf. And I think this, I guess, ties partly to your question. When you have 2,500 employees responding to customer service issues, on one hand, it's really exciting. You have all these different people all communicating. At the other side, then that starts to beg the question of having workflow tools and having all the things that you would want to be able to understand how different people in an organization are communicating, especially because it's a little bit different than IM or a phone call, in that whatever they say is going to stick in that real-time feed that's then searchable by
So that
Google
you've
or
raised a whole
whoever
other
else.
issue, which is everyone in your organization is now a customer service rep
Yep.
and has an opinion and
Yep.
speaking unofficially or officially on behalf of the company. I want
Yep.
to dive into more of that later because I think
Yep.
it's a real issue.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the reality for companies now, whether it's a challenge or an opportunity, however you choose to look at it, is that we operate in an environment of transparency. Just like the internet was a disruptive force and all of a sudden people could Google prices and kind of do comparison shopping, social media, Facebook, Twitter, it's been extremely disruptive for how companies operate both internally as well as externally. because it's a completely new communications medium where it's public or semi-public in many cases. And a lot of companies that haven't had good communications in the past, both internally and externally, now have to completely change their business processes and think about how they respond, how they listen, and how they react and adapt to this new environment.
I mean, I think it's just a challenging thing, right? It's whenever there's a big change in terms of what medium people are using for communication, the tools are going to have to adapt and the rules are going to have to adapt in the same way that I would imagine when the internet first came out and companies had web pages, that was a new thing they weren't used to in terms of how they represented themselves, how they represented their brand. Now people are using social media, so it's very challenging at first because you got to figure out how to do it. But given that people are there and that's what they're using to communicate, you need to have a presence there, and you just need to make sure that the way that your brand translates to this new communication tool reflects the message you want to give to your consumers.
So I think the consensus is that you have to do this. Lane thinks that it's actually ridiculous to even question doing this, and I don't necessarily disagree with them. But I think some big brands out there are still way on the sidelines, and there are people who absolutely don't want to touch Facebook, Get Satisfaction, Twitter, and other things. How do we talk to them and convince them to do it?
So when I talk to organizations like that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one, if you dig into the question, what I find is it's less that they're afraid of acting publicly, communicating publicly. I mean, they've even the most technophobic, I guess, brands are still interested, starting to think about that. I think the
Is it fear of technology or is it something else? Is it fear of losing?
I think it's basically
having a conversation.
I think that they're being defensive about. I mean, most of these companies have spent the last 15 years building up massive CRM systems that are designed to control the relationship with customers.
Yeah.
Right, and this is a piece of that is different. Not necessarily something that can't be embedded into existing ERP and CRM structures. It's just that they have a defensive crouch because they've invested, multi-gazillions of dollars into these systems, and they don't yet know how this new piece fits. So for me, I think it's almost just a process issue for these companies. How do they figure out how to fit that in?
What's a good first step?
Get satisfaction. Although if I had to guess, I'd say whatever's coming out from Hearsay Labs is probably a pretty good first step in that direction too.
Unfortunately, we can't say anything about that yet.
I'm just guessing based on the book title.
Well, I appreciate it. A couple things. I mean, to answer your question, I think we're seeing a lot of progress in terms of companies realizing that they need to be on these social networks. 2 years ago, when I started writing the book, we did these interviews. People thought we were crazy. And now almost every company knows at least they have the consciousness around the fact that they should be there, because 400 million active users, they have to be where their customers are. And increasingly, their customers are on social media. So they get that. And then in terms of the first step, I mean, the thing about social media is that you're probably already on social media before you're officially on social media, because people are talking about you. And so using tools like search.twitter.com or Facebook Lexicon before they shut that down was a great way for companies to gauge what was going on and not really work in a vacuum. Say, before I design my campaign, before I create my Facebook page, I'm first going to see what people are saying about me, both good or bad. I'm going to capitalize on the good, and then for the bad, I'm either going to clarify and correct it if it's factually incorrect, or maybe it's an opportunity for us to actually improve or develop a new product or feature that's been missing and that people care enough to just tell us that they really want.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, which is that before you actually even create a presence, just that ability to monitor, at both the overall brand level, at every specific, product, in terms of competitors, the tools that are out there, everything from, Radiant 6 to Viral Heat to some of the stuff we'll be doing with Tap 11. All these tools are there to help enable you to actually see what those conversations are. And then I think brands can start to think about how they start to join those conversations. But definitely, at least initially seeing what people are saying, I think is probably a good first step.
Lane, with Get Satisfaction, you have a situation where you have very public conversations around customer service. And we've seen that on Twitter as well with the Comcast guy who I dealt with very early on, who will, somebody says, I hate Comcast, which, everybody said that at one point. And then he'll directly address them and get a van out there, whatever, and deal with it. Is that a good thing? Are you seeing, I'd love to hear some anecdotes about companies that have done well in using public customer service to push their brand as a company that cares or gets it. And I'd love to hear a couple of anecdotes about companies that, maybe have face planted, and done things the wrong way.
Sure. I mean, just speaking generally, the companies that are at the extremes are generally the ones that do best, right? So we can look at an extreme and say that, say, Comcast and AT&T are on one side with terrible customer service no matter what they do. I mean, terrible customer relations, largely because of the nature of their business, which is infrastructure, where the cost of customers is nothing compared to the cost of, I don't know, running cable underneath.
Well, it's also maybe a lack of competition. That's more
Fair enough, yes. And then on the other side, you got a company like Zappos, right, which is building, or Nordstrom's builds its entire brand on top of that, and so is willing to make sort of massive infrastructural investments. So, unsurprisingly, unsurprisingly or surprisingly, both of them participate really publicly and openly inside an environment like GetSatisfaction. So Comcast has a lot of success in the public sphere because basically anything they do is going to make their situation better. Literally anything, right? Like that's you talked to Frank, the guy that really led the charge at Comcast Cares, which is the department that does that, and he said, yeah, they gave me carte blanche because what am I going to do? Make it worse? And similarly, it's true. Similarly, Zappos, and it's been very effective. I mean, to be fair, it's been very effective for Comcast and companies like Dell. And then on the other end of it, you got a company like Zappos where every new channel is an opportunity for them to interact with customers, right? Online, I mean, phone, email, online, offline. I mean, they'll take all comers when it comes to new channels for communicating with their customers. So those are the ones that.
So who's done something really funny, either or really good or really bad? I mean, there's got to be an anecdote. I was talking in the hallway about an anecdote. About a story I heard last night that I almost wrote about, where a rep went off and started yelling at somebody theoretically on GetSatisfaction.
Yeah.
Have you seen anything? Have you seen that where people just start to lose it because of the sheer volume of negativity coming at them? Or have you seen somebody just absolutely handle a crisis well?
So I've seen. Let's start with people handling crises well, because actually I don't feel like I see that many people lose it all that often. Maybe because if that's your bent, you're less likely just to participate publicly generally. We generally see that the companies that do best are the ones that weather crises. I mean, they just don't. They don't back down from their position, and they don't give in to the ranting essentially, but they do. They basically they say they're sorry, and then they take the time to figure out what it is that the customer is actually saying. Because buried inside, here would be my advice to anybody in this environment. Buried inside every rant is a good point. Buried somewhere underneath somebody's crazy emotional state, there is usually something somewhere that set them off that if you understood that well enough, you could probably use as a way to better your service.
Ignorance seems to be the underlying point of 90% of the rants that I read on the internet.
Well, you are in a privileged position for that, though. For most companies, I think.
Did you just insult me? I'm not sure. I think that in your case, you've got a real situation where a customer's unhappy about something.
Yeah.
There's probably
Fair
something
enough.
that happened there.
So at least,
yeah.
In the environment of speaking about brands or companies, though, that's usually the case. So we had, Tide is really active in its participation in GetSatisfaction, and since they opened their public
What do
community.
people complain about with Tide?
Well, they love Tide, actually. I mean, that's the thing. They love
Because it
Tide.
cleans their clothes.
Well, they love Tide. Yes.
What goes wrong with Tide? Like what?
Do you do your own laundry? So I think.
I do, yeah. I just can't imagine
this is going south for me,
passionate
people.
discussions breaking out over Tide.
But they do, because if you look at it, like cleaning clothes is very tied into a lot of individuals' identities, right? Because it's tied to the idea of particularly like motherhood and home, and you become invested in the products that you care about. So there are people that are crazy invested in Tide products. And when Tide launched our site, it opened up this when they sort of actively started participating in our site, it opened up this series of conversations from people who were very, very angry about the Tide products that they had loved that got discontinued. Right? Like that's where their anger came from. We love these products, and then you took them away from us. Now, there might have been really, really good business reasons for them. I'm sure there were. God knows they do enough number crunching to understand. But still, it turns out for this passionate, vocal minority,
Right.
That's valuable. So then Tide has to ask, and I think they're doing this right now, asking the question, okay, what do we do about that? We've learned something new from our customers. How do we respond in this environment? How do we change our business practices so that we can, address this really powerful vocal subset of customers? That, I think, is valuable.
I think Lane actually just touched on a couple points that are really interesting. One is that I think customer service, as it's always been done, has been done fairly privately. Like you would call someone up, you talk to them on the phone. If the rep goes crazy, no one really gets exposure to that.
Yeah.
Now the risk of making a mistake is so much bigger because that stuff just gets blown way out of the water and spread, and everyone gets to see it. So every single one of those thousands of reps that you used to have on the phone before and that you could control pretty tightly, now is a public mouthpiece for the company. Back to how do you control the representatives of the company?
Yeah.
So that's a huge challenge that social media presents that I think companies have to think about very clearly in terms of before jumping in. I think someone like Comcast that maybe only can go up, that's fine. But if you have a brand that's actually very well respected and you actually have a lot to lose,
Like Tide.
like Tide, let's say, that's actually a giant risk that you're taking by opening up the conversation to the whole world. And, you know, on top of that, adding all these viral channels that if anything goes wrong, you know that stuff is just going to really spread.
Let's jump into this. You guys have touched on it twice now. I was going to push it till later, but let's jump into it. So your company, you have more than one employee. Everyone's a customer service rep. They have their own Twitter accounts, their own Facebook accounts. They're impassioned about their own products, but they're not trained.
Let me
What
add something
happens?
else. It's not only, I think, sort of everyone else that can really ruin things, but also it could be like at the corporate level, if you make a decision or your approach is incorrect, that could actually backfire for you. So I think back to your case study of someone that has gotten some flack lately. Chase, with that giving challenge that they had recently on Facebook, they pulled out a bunch of causes that were in the running, and they got a lot of flack for that because it was like, hey, this wasn't transparent. Why did you pick these guys out?
Yeah.
And that was at a corporate level. People probably thought this through, lots of meeting, lots of legal, and it still went bad. So that's just one
Some
example
people
of a
have
lot
an
of stuff that
instinct for
happens.
what might work and what doesn't, but
I
yeah.
also wanted to add, I mean, in addition to the transparency piece, when you think about customer service on, say, Twitter, there are two things that all of us can probably learn from what Frank did at Comcast. One is the power of persona marketing. I mean, it's easy to hate Comcast because it's this large institution. It's really hard to hate Frank Eliason. He's so nice. He has pictures of his kids up there, and he always gets back to you. And so people can rant and rave all they want, but you know that Frank is out there. He's rooting for you. He's trying to get your service fixed and back
So
up.
be a human being is
Yeah,
part of this.
so it's all about the humanization of, especially if you're not a very sexy company, large corporate entity. The second thing that I think they did really well was realizing that a lot of the questions that come up in a public sphere, like on Twitter or on Facebook, oftentimes it's not your customer support reps who answer that question. It's your really zealous fans, and it's your other customers who rise up and say, no, this isn't the case, or yeah, there was a huge storm in San Francisco. They sent vans out to fix it because I saw it. And so we're seeing a lot of companies where their call center volume is actually going down. So there's the real quantifiable cost savings in going to social media because they're outsourcing a lot of this customer service
You have
to
you have
other
like
customers.
verifiable data on that? Because I've never seen a study on that at all.
I don't have like hard data, but I mean, I was talking to Frank
Yeah,
because
okay.
he's contributing to the second edition of my book, and he was saying that they've seen it's just like moving.
Sometimes
from
people
one
just
channel
want to
another.
vent. And one good Twitter attack, you feel better already, even though you know your cable still isn't going to work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about this issue of who in your company is a customer service rep? And if it's everyone, how do you control them and train them?
So I think this is actually a really important issue, and probably there'll be no perfect service that addresses it, but some of it has to do with workflow. I mean, so we've talked to a number of companies, and with Tap 11, one of the things we're doing is actually setting very specific parameters where someone can be a system administrator, they can be an editor, they can be an analyst. Basically, you can set different people having the ability of what type of conversations they have, and then you can also look as sort of a system administrator and track back those conversations. So you can't necessarily take back anything that's been said,
So
but
part
you
of
can
it
start
is-
to see who's having good conversations. And
Part of it, there are no tools today. Like,
Yeah,
it's
there are no
actually pretty
tools.
hard to administer these
Yeah.
accounts. And like, Twitter, there's one account.
Yeah.
There's one set of credentials.
yeah,
Guys like you are starting to come out with tools that help people
Right.
manage these accounts,
Right.
Facebook, Twitter, et cetera. But what about who gets to say stuff, right?
Yeah.
And who gets to respond?
I think tools are part of it, but a lot of it is companies need to hire people they trust. And people always talk about Tony Hsieh at Zappos and how he actually encourages everyone in the company to tweet, and they do Twitter training as part of their new hire orientation. Now, does that make sense for every company, especially if you're not a retailer and you're not B2C? Probably not, but at least figure out, spend some time figuring out what the social media guidelines are, and just like companies have policies around what you can and cannot email both internally and externally, or what you can and cannot blog about, I think a natural extension is figuring out how that policy applies to Twitter and Facebook.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think also in the Comcast example, they started with Frank. It typically starts with a couple people that sort of kind of embody or sort of create that personal brand, and then it makes sense to sort of stage your way from there into sort of the customer service team, since obviously that's a much broader undertaking.
So here's what I think about this. Not that you guys asked, but I think that we're seeing. what do I think? Here's what I think. I think we're seeing an increasing rate of employees sort of doing their own thing, usually an impassioned sort of response, but in a poorly executed manner to somebody attacking their company. An example, last night, I posted a story about MySpace where I was posting some information that their lawyers were trying very hard to keep off the internet. And their social media manager, who is actually a friend of mine, said, well, why don't we just start posting your personal information, Arrington? And I know he's joking, completely joking. But that is not what the MySpace community manager should say when you think about it. It just puts in your head like, oh yeah, I guess they could start publishing our personal information. We saw Randy Zuckerberg do this with a bouncer at a bar in New York. She was out late, she'd probably been drinking. And Randy Zuckerberg is like the sweetest person in the whole world. But she just put on Facebook, oh, they wouldn't let us in this bar. The bouncer wouldn't let us in this bar. He's a jerk. Wouldn't it be interesting if their Facebook page disappears tomorrow? Right? And they actually apologized when press got out about that on TechCrunch. But the point is that people make mistakes, right? And people say things sometimes without thinking. And sometimes your best employees, your most impassioned employees, are going to say stupid things, like Randy Zuckerberg saying that. And I think, it's just my opinion, but I think we're actually, society, going to eventually become more accepting of this, that it won't become a big deal that Randy Zuckerberg said that, because unless an official statement that's been reviewed by a company is put out, at some point it's going to have to start to accept that people make mistakes and that kids put pictures of them smoking pot up on Facebook when they're in college, and that doesn't mean they shouldn't be an investment banker later. And companies, their employees sometimes say stupid things, and that means, it isn't necessarily a news event. Do you guys disagree with that, or? No.
No, I'm pretty much firmly in agreement with you on that one. I just think that the sort of the need we have to sort of figure out how to forget things, right? We don't know how to forget things anymore. Like we used to just forget stuff because it would fall off or it would disappear, but now it's all archived and it's searchable and it's all there on Google or it's all there on Facebook underneath our name. So we just have to learn different ways of managing or reacting or frankly forgetting that something is
without turning into a sterile organization. Because the worst thing that can happen is you never say anything controversial, and we go back to sort of the press release world, right? I don't want that to happen. We want real human voices saying real human things, right?
We see this thing on Get Satisfaction all the time. So we encourage employees who use this system to use their real photos, right, as their avatars, and to use real names. Don't require, just encourage. We're inspired by Yelp, who suggests that. And it's amazing to see the connections that individuals will draw. Again, like Tide is another great example of this, right? Like the brand manager is on there, and she's
Tide's a paying customer, I assume.
Yeah. I could switch to a different one, but they're really in the forefront of my mind at the moment.
Right, the cutting edge of cleaning technology.
And they sent me a T-shirt. But I really should have worn the T-shirt today. But again, it's a bunch of sort of middle-aged housewives who are really into the idea that they connect with Mandy, the brand manager for Tide. That is meaningful to them. They are Tide customers for life, and you see that across the board. Doesn't matter what kind of company. It's sort of the equivalent of feeling like you're getting to speak to the CEO of a company. When the JetBlue CEO shows up and he walks down the aisles. It's just the equivalent of being able to do that with everybody inside this business that matters to you.
And when Mandy has a bad day and she tells somebody to go pound sand because they're mad that Tide discontinued some product, that's okay.
That's going to have to be okay.
Because net, the company's ahead.
Yeah, pretty much. We helped to negotiate with Tide's legal department for 6 weeks to figure out how to make that okay.
Wow, that must have been a big revenue deal.
But they're getting there.
6-week deal? Yep.
You get one per panel.
All right, so at this point, if you have a question you want to add to the conversation, go. But we have a lot of time left, so we'll sort of fold stuff in. I want to ask one more question, then we'll start going into that. Trolls, people who attack your company on Facebook and Twitter and Get Satisfaction. Do we embrace them or do we shun them? What's the best way to do that as a brand? Or what's the best thing to do as a brand?
Don't feed the troll. I think that still stands.
Don't try to fix the situation if they're
there's a difference between trolling and people having a problem, right? Like there's someone that's
it's a fine line sometimes. But
sometimes, yeah. I mean, at the extremes, you can definitely make a distinction between someone that's there for the sole purpose of harassment, right, intimidation. I think that's a pretty clear line, and you just say, hey, this is not acceptable. We're not engaging in a conversation with these people. Then there's people that might be sort of an irate customer, but hey, my calls keep getting dropped by AT&T. It's just like I dropped this really important call. I'm really pissed off, and I'm going to take that out publicly. That's an unhappy customer. Like that's a customer you have to address. Regardless of the customer's attitude, that's a different question, right? I don't think you have to, let's say, stoop to that level, but it's still an unhappy customer that you have to address.
We refer to those guys as griefers as opposed to trolls. You know, they just want to cause some grief because they have been wronged. But yeah, they are a customer, and so you need to figure out what the most appropriate way is to respond. And again, I think it's about kind of getting to the nugget of their issues and ignoring the emotional content.
It must be painful for brands to see these comments up there, though, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they're not used to this sort of, their brand logo, they're there, they clearly have a presence, and there's somebody with the most outrageous comment. You know, they're going to want to delete that, right?
Yeah, the first time.
And then they delete it, and then suddenly they see it, you know, that's an issue in and of itself, and why are you deleting stuff? And so, what do you recommend? I mean, where's that going to go? What do you guys recommend?
We recommend that they don't. We recommend that they respond. We treat trolls
That they actually respond to every troll.
that they try, and we like to say respond, but only if there's no malice in your heart. So respond, but only, it's true, respond, but only if you can respond to the content of the message and the problem that the person is having, and not any of the emotional swirl that surrounds it. And if you can't, then, like, you know, go take a bath and see if you can do it a couple hours later.
And that's where you guys start to make money, right? Is to get control of that community and to start deleting stuff, you need to pay you. Is that right?
In our case, well, just moderation generally
Yeah.
is one of the things that costs in our community. But we actually, we really discourage deletion. We have a bunch of other tools that you can use before you delete something. So we've been trying to figure out systemic ways to solve some of these problems. We have a thing in our system called the change log. And basically what that does is you can do all of this stuff, delete, remove, edit, blah, all that stuff. But we keep track of all the changes on a separate page called the change log. So any customer, in order to preserve transparency, any customer can go there and see, here are the changes the company made.
Yeah.
There's obvious exceptions for, like, you know, that's a credit card number. But just how do we preserve that kind of environment so that customers can still feel like,
Wow, okay.
Because 99% of the time, they're not moderating things because they want it to get rid of something. They're doing it because they think it makes the experience better for everybody.
Yeah, one of the most obvious examples we haven't even touched on is Tiger Woods. So obviously, someone has to talk about it, but he did the opposite. He did the no transparency. He actually went from having comments on his website to basically making it a Q&A, and clearly the conversation isn't just on Twitter. The conversation goes across all these sites, and I think, you know, he lost sponsors as a result. And I mean, he may have lost them anyway, but he clearly, by
How do you
just
fix a situation like
Yeah.
that? What are you going to go on, get satisfaction, and have a conversation?
Well, I
don't
think
see
that he would
I don't see that
have
happening.
he would have diffused it a little bit if he started talking about it immediately.
Yeah.
The less he talked about it, the more that the buzz chamber just started echoing. So I guess the point, that's a huge example relative to, like, a Tide specific complaint, but it's the same thing, which is the more that you just let them go out and just make noise, they'll just keep echoing until the point that you actually address it. And that was, you know, I thought surprising that his team didn't do anything to that regard.
And of course, you can't delete tweets. Only the person who does the tweet can delete it. And I think that I have a lot of faith in people, in that they're pretty smart. And if they see something written about you that isn't accurate, or
Defend that statement.
Well,
You have
I
clearly
just-
not been spent much time on the internet. If you have faith in people and think they're pretty smart.
well, I have faith in people's customers. So if customers by and large love your product, and every so often some griefer or troll comes along and says something, well, not only do I think that other customers may say good things to drown it out, but maybe they'll come to your defense, and that's a lot more credible than you being defensive as a brand and saying, no, that's not the case, especially if it's an opinion-related tweet.
Questions? Over here.
I was wondering if we could reorient a little bit. I'm just curious in general around acquisition marketing. So a little less around supporting customers you've got
Yep.
and dealing with customer relationships, and more around
Strategic or tactical?
tactically.
Okay.
So what great case studies you've seen about companies that have got really good operating leverage out of their efforts through these marketing channels?
Well, I think that actually Michael brought up a good one, which is 10% of his traffic is now coming from Twitter and social media channels. If you go to Twitter events, you'll hear a number of brands starting to say that they're increasingly getting close to the amount of traffic they get from Google SEO from places like Twitter, and a lot of it's links, right? If you look at all the big guys, they all, you know, from the New York Times on down, they all put up link after link, and the good ones put up interesting things. So like Whole Foods, as an example, doesn't just put up any type of link. They'll put up a link that's to, you know, a tip of like what could, you know, give you, like, you know, better health. And so they've added good content, and then there are a lot of tools that now allow you to track, you know, how many people are clicking on that link, and, you know, basically the same type of things that Google Analytics does. So I think actually, while we've been talking about engagement and service, which is what a lot of the big companies want, a lot of the smaller ones, when you talk to them, think more about how you drive, you know, awareness and promotion.
Two thoughts here. One is we're finding with social media that the lines are blurring across the different functions. It's not about standalone customer service, standalone marketing, and standalone sales. It turns out if you have really great customer service and you're getting back to people and there's good conversation about your products, that is actually a marketing and has brand effect. When people visit your page and they realize that there's dialogue and that you provide great service, that's part of the value that you provide as a vendor. The other thought is, just from a B2B example that I profiled in the book, which I thought was really neat, was Aster Data Systems, which is Silicon Valley startup started by Stanford PhD students. And early on, they didn't have a big sales team, and they didn't know how to get customers. They didn't know how to do prospecting. And what they did was they had every employee in the company, not just the handful of salespeople, but all the engineers, the admin, everyone from the CEO down, go on LinkedIn and do a search on a database admin, because that was their target profile of a customer. Now, what they got back was a list not only of database admins, but database admins that were connected to these people either through 1 or 2 degrees. And it turns out, especially in an enterprise sale, it's all about trust and all about who you know. And so they were able to, either through the direct connection and relationship or asking for a referral, warm intro, get into these accounts, and that's how they built up their customer list. Some of them really great customers, including MySpace, and they've just grown from there. So I thought that was a really great grassroots way of using the people you know and the social capital among the personal relationships of your employees.
Should you hire a full-time person to manage your brand on social networks? Is this part of the communications group as you get bigger, part of your marketing group? Is it the CEO's job?
Are you asking me?
All of you.
I think it really depends on the company. I mean, our company, for example, we sell to small business, and in many of these cases, these are sole proprietors who, they do everything. They don't have a separate marketing person, much less a social media person. So for them, it's just much more about incorporating this new skill set and
What
these new
about this
channels.
audience? Startups, coming out of Stanford, they're going to raise some money. At what point do they really need to think about this? It's a new idea. I mean, a few years ago, there was no such job, so.
Well, I do think it's very important to have someone who is someone or someone's in that role from the beginning, just because the moment you start making connections is the moment that things start happening for you, and it's pretty much impossible to predict how those connections will become valuable. And yet, the act of sort of making as many as you can is the way that you maximize.
So how much of the CEO's time when you're a 3-person startup should be spent on this, though?
Well, I mean, you don't sleep.
spend all of it.
You don't sleep when you're a
You
startup.
go to Twitter,
so-
then you go to Facebook, then you
Yeah.
go to get set. You can just set circle, right?
Just,
And
you
just-
just make it your second job when you're not sleeping.
like with the
It's
other
easy.
hand, and then No, but seriously, is it 20% of your day? Is it?
I don't.
And then if you have to make
don't even know how
headcount
to quantify.
decisions, and you can't hire someone else, you have to spend half of an engineering headcount expense on hiring there's a real opportunity cost here.
No, I would agree with that.
So I mean, that's a question we deal with. We don't have this person at TechCrunch. It's all of our writers kind of do it ad hoc, and do we hire somebody? And it's an issue. It's like an opportunity cost issue for us.
I think it's good for people to do it themselves. I mean, especially in the beginning, at least to understand how it works and to really listen to the customer. I mean, a lot of companies we work with, that I profile in the book, they tried outsourcing their Facebook page or Twitter page to an agency, and they found that put too much distance between them and their consumer. And so while they may have a dedicated person or one person or a few people focus on it, they still are very plugged in terms of what's being said and in terms of the strategy and overall messaging that's going out. And so I think, as I think about my time as a CEO of a 2-person startup, I do think about social media, and it's an important channel for us. And I basically take the time that I would spend on PR or marketing, and I spend part of that time thinking about our blogs or Twitter and Facebook.
Yeah, I think actually when you're first starting, probably doing it yourself as a CEO is probably the most important thing you can think about, because the same way we've been talking about big brands understanding what their customers think, it's the exact same thing as a small company. I have a friend who runs a corduroy company. It's called Corduroys, that does horizontal corduroy as opposed to vertical, which is a story in itself. But he said over the last year he was mentioned 7,000 times. And that's that's as big as his whole email distribution list. So finding out who those people are, connecting to them, and and this is also a conversation. You can't really hire someone at the very beginning of your business to talk about you. I think it's only as you get bigger, and even if you look at, companies like Zappos, the CEO still is very actively involved. You're actively involved. So I think it becomes more of a support as opposed to a replacement.
I mean, I think you also reach a point where you can actually try to put a dollar value to what this role would actually bring to you. So you have a lot of data on how big social media is for you, and you have a sense of how valuable a visitor is, how valuable a subscriber is. So you can start thinking about, if I had someone doing this role and they were able to give us a 10% lift on this, how much value would that be? Like, we run through this decision like almost on a monthly basis when we're doing headcount adjustments at our company. We began with basically just our CEO and myself doing everything in social media because we don't have the resources.
Yep.
We're not big enough. We don't have enough traffic to justify someone. But then you reach a point where, okay, we have enough stuff that we can actually justify headcount for this. So why don't we think about everything that we're doing and how we can split up some of those responsibilities where still, let's say, corporate level announcement, vision level announcement, really important things, that's still the CEO's job to communicate and still to represent that. But a lot of the sort of everyday transactional thing and a lot of the heavy lifting, you can get someone that's younger that you can train, train sort of working very closely with you so they understand the right tone and the right messaging that has to take place. And then I think that person, really pays for themselves as you grow.
All right. Another question? Here?
My question is about viral videos and their usefulness. And right now it seems to be like products where they really work on for males in the 18, 15 to 30-year-old range, and that's basically where they lie as well. And so I was just wondering if you see any trajectory of how viral video production companies that are currently handling that.
Can I start answering that? Because we're building, do you guys mind? Completely off topic, but this has to do with video. We're moving into video at TechCrunch, and we're building a high-def studio in our office. Actually, today the carpenter was there, and it's a 20 by 30 room, and we're going to spend around $25,000 on this, on hardware and carpentry and everything else. The studio we're building, you couldn't build 10 years ago, period. I mean, let alone for any amount of money, just where you can sort of just jump on the air at any time and start live streaming in HD. So it's not directly related to what you're saying, but video is hugely important, and it's becoming more and more important to us as we go, and just because the costs are dropping like to nothing, where you can really do really, really high quality stuff. I mean, you have a Mac with Final Cut Pro, may or may not pay for Final Cut Pro, and you've got a studio that $25,000 isn't a big line item for a startup when you're talking about the same technology, millions of dollars, even less. So anyway, it's very important for us, and we're going to do a lot more of it. So, but back to the question.
Well, I mean, I think that this is actually a
Come
question
on,
that
you got your push in about I don't want to tell anyone, but we're launching a new widget on Facebook. I hope it doesn't get out. I mean, we ought to.
What? I was admiring you. That was an admiring smile.
I was going to say, you have to think about this question the same way that you would think about any marketing channel, right? Like, depending on who you're trying to reach, you're trying to figure out whether that channel is something that they use. So if you're trying to reach someone that doesn't watch videos or isn't overly represented in video watching, then it may not make that much sense. Like, we've had to go through this decision a lot. Because we have used viral videos to reach millions of people. We have used Dig to reach millions of people. But those are different niches, and you have to understand who is watching viral videos. In our case, it was like our pet community, right? So like pets, like puppies, great for viral video. Put a puppy on a video, you win, right? So that we got to focus on that kind of content for viral videos. On Dig, there's a different kind of audience, right? It's maybe more humor, so you're going to take your content that's more humor related, and you're going to try to pitch it there rather than take let's say my deep health related content and try to push it as a viral video.
Okay, I think we're done with the video question.
Customer service videos do not go viral. Just FYI, never happens.
How does sort of mobile play into this? So I'm on Facebook, I have a device which knows my location, and now I'm sort of near either your store if you're Nike, or I'm near where your products are sold. So what are some of the opportunities there for converting the relationship into an actual product purchase in the real world?
There's Cedric. You know Cedric? He's been around. Is he here? He's one of the speakers here. Cosworld. He was here this morning. Yeah. He talks a lot about how important it is for retail shops to get people in the door, and that, depending on the type of store, if you're a 7-Eleven, it's like 80% of people who walk in, it might not be that high, but it certainly is high, are going to buy something. Actually, it might be more like 95%. And then it goes all the way down to other shops. I'm sure that this is a thing that you guys talk about at Stanford all the time, but there are other types of shops. But they're going to pay a lot of money to get people in the door if you can verify it. One of the problems we've seen with guys like Foursquare is that it's really easy to check into stuff by cheating, by going anywhere near it. And if you provide incentive like a free coffee at Starbucks, then there's an incentive to cheat. And I think there's some technology coming out that'll at least get you in the door before you can, sort of check in. But from our point of view, we're seeing a lot of startups at least address this space. But what do you guys think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am actually working on a blog post on this that's going to go out next week. But I think Looped and Foursquare have done a really good job here. For example, Looped partnered with Jack in the Box so that if you're in the vicinity of a Jack in the Box restaurant, you actually get pushed a coupon to go into the store and actually purchase something. I thought that was really neat. And then a lot of the established social web players like Facebook and Twitter and Yelp, they're building in mobile features too that take advantage of geolocation. And Mike would probably know this better than me, but there's rumors about Facebook looking into acquiring Looped. I don't know if those are true.
Yeah, we wrote that story. I wrote that story the other night. I think Facebook,
No more than me.
everything I've heard is that there's concerns with people when they, I've heard, this is just what I've heard, but in Korea and specifically, a lot of people have, share their location data via mobile devices. And that there have been repeated instances, and it's always the husband or the boyfriend, something with the girlfriend or the wife. But we're like either they're tracking them or they're demanding that they be tracked, and that Facebook has shied away from this, and I think at least part of it has to be like you got to get this right. I mean, the attorney generals will jump on this so fast as soon as you have somebody get hurt. I haven't heard of anything going wrong with Foursquare and Gowalla, but that's sort of the elephant in the room when it comes to this mobile stuff.
And there's the Please Rob Me, which is the recent site where they just check people who have checked out of being at home. So it's like for would-be burglars, that would be a great target for you.
Yeah, it just sort of highlights the absurdity of how much data we share voluntarily
Yeah.
on the internet and how much that can hurt us. That's a whole nother panel right there.
Yeah.
Though. Yeah.
I think the other part, which is really important about mobile, is right now it's still relatively spam-free. I mean, the way that sort of email got to the point where now we have to have these spam filters, and 95% of what I get every day is spam. The carriers, for all the bad things they did, some of the good things is that they had rules and regulations around sort of opt-in in terms of getting SMSs, and location will be the same thing. I don't want to get pinged, with 50 notifications every time I drive by a Starbucks or a Jack in the Box. I want to have some sort of relevancy relative to what I'm interested in, and then I think it will be very useful in terms of having things that are, the proximity actually becomes a new search criterion, a new thing that shows me things when I want.
Another question? You got something to say? Tide?
Tide bite.
I'm in a Target. Tide could give me a
Sure,
coupon.
that's true. It's true.
Like,
Yeah, the one, I guess the one thing I would have to say
that was
about
a total. You can totally
No,
get done with that.
I-
You're gonna you're not gonna.
I like them, but
You're
they're
not gonna
just-
gauge if
They're
you
just
want
one of thousands of customers.
Right.
I guess the one thing I would say is I'm interested to see how, so one of the things that we see with Get Satisfaction, right, is that businesses start to develop not a transactional sense of their customers, but a relational sense of that customers. And by that I mean businesses of all sizes, even the smaller ones start to see, or even the bigger ones, start to see that there is relationship value to interactions with customers beyond just when they give them money. Right? And that there is something to the lifetime value of the customer, and each of these interactions doesn't have to end with some sort of exchange of money for goods or services. And with mobile, I think we might, whenever I hear people talking about like how we're going to monetize the mobile space, they always go straight to transactional, coupons, discounts, gaming. And I wonder if there maybe isn't something in the mobile space that is also about relationships, whether it's a relationship between, going back to that earlier thing about like faces and avatars, a relationship between you and one of the people that works inside the company, right? Or like developing some sort of relationship with an individual employee, or if it means developing relationships with other people who also care about that brand or that product, or meeting up at that space at a certain time. So I think there's opportunities in the mobile space to think about it less transactionally.
Another question? This side is the interactive side. It's like nothing. That's kind of weird. Statistically, that's impossible.
The book away, the best question. So.
But why is every question? There's not
don't
a hand
know.
up over here. That's statistically unlikely. Okay. Right here.
I was curious if you found that any users of particular social services are more valuable than others, like your Twitter users more valuable than Facebook users, or more interactive, or anything around that?
Facebook users through the moon more valuable than visitors from any other service. And we find that not just with our own site, Mike mentioned. I mean, if we look at the stats of like people who just the Google Analytics stats of people who visit from Facebook, they stick around 10, 20 times longer than just about any other service, possible exception of StumbleUpon. But I would also say that when we talk to some of the larger brands that we work with, they have a significant preference for Facebook over everything else, including Twitter. And I think a lot of that has to do with Facebook taking the deep social connections that people create or that are reflected in the Facebook environment is part of it, right? Like Twitter, you can get tons and tons of followers, but those are like connections. And also the extent to which Facebook has made an effort to create a space for an environment that's captivating for brands and that invites them in and invites them in to participate in ways that line up with the way that they're already used to thinking and buying.
I think that's right on, and a lot of that is rooted in the fact that Facebook owns our online identity. If you think about our Facebook profile, we're sharing more about ourselves than we ever have before. You know, where we're from, how old we are, our religious preferences, our political preferences, our job title. I mean, this is a lot of information that we're sharing because that's where our friends are and there's social pressures to share this. But what it means for businesses is that now there's a wealth of data that wasn't previously available for us to use to build better relationships, whether it's for recruiting or sales perspective, and to better target our messages and marketing. I mean, if you go to facebook.com/ads, basically you can craft an ad and target it to very specific profiles of people based on the information that they're sharing on their profile. So I think those combined create the opportunities for these really deep relationships, not just between individuals, but also potentially between companies and individuals.
And one thing that it brings up is as you start to talk to a lot of these major brands is you might think initially that they'd want to have sort of create an update and publish it everywhere. And what they've all said is that they have very different conversations on a Facebook versus a Twitter. The Twitter tend to be super fast. It's kind of very quick and kind of echoing what you guys are saying. It's a deeper conversation on Facebook. And so they intentionally segment those conversations and think about them very differently.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think if you start to think about those pages as landing pages, like Facebook fan pages as landing pages, there's been some interesting stuff on the web about this recently. You can just get a crazy amount of information from Facebook about the customers that are coming through. And that's, you know, I mean, Facebook, of course, is going to charge for it, probably more and more over time, but still, it's really valuable stuff.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on advertising on Twitter, like when they're launching that, and also how social media advertising can become more effective, like click-through rates have been reported as being low on Facebook and that topic.
Sure. So I'm not really familiar with the first question, so I answer the second one. In terms of social media click-through, I mean, everyone knows that it's pretty poor on Facebook and on Twitter because the intent isn't there. It isn't really a place where we do search.
I think people are comparing that to search result click-through rates, there's just nothing that can really
It's
compare
like
to that.
apples and oranges.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think the click-through rates that we're hearing about on Facebook are pretty good compared to banner ad rates in general, right? But the conversion rates after that may not be super hot, and you may end up being, you see some guys getting pretty ROI negative pretty quickly. I think part of the problem is there are a lot of scammy things that are in there competing the prices up as well. You know, the Kai stuff and the weight loss and the dating and just, I mean, all the stuff that makes up the internet that is such a wonderful place to hang out in.
Yeah, but I feel really optimistic about the future because right now,
Why?
basically, because, yeah.
Because what? Because people are smart and good and will always do the right thing.
Because Facebook has all about who is looking at the ad. They know, again, all that information that people share on their profile and that they're tweeting about or updating on their status message. And Google has always been about what people are searching on at that moment. Well, as Facebook adds more search functionality, this is part of why they acquired FriendFeed, you can imagine more commerce and more search taking place on Facebook. But not only on Facebook, with Facebook Connect, if you imagine implementing Facebook Connect with Amazon or even with Google or some sort of search site, then you could marry the two where you have both the person's profile information as well as a social graph of what their friends are searching on and what they purchased, plus the intent. And so I think when that happens, we're going to see highly, highly relevant ads, which will be, you know, right for the right person at the right time. So,
Pretty good answer. I mean, yeah, that
I hope so.
makes sense.
To the Twitter point, the only thing I'll say is, you know, Dick Kostler at, I think, Mike's conference said that they had some really clever stuff that was coming up. I think there's just a ton of room for clever invention and reinvention of advertising in the social space. I think we've barely gotten started on that one.
I mean, I think on the Twitter side, if you want to get a sense of it, there's a company called Adly, basically sponsored tweets. Like they pay you to tweet something out to your followers, and they have a link usually. You can see how many people are clicking on that link and get a sort of a rough sense of what the click-through rates are. I can tell you right now, the variance is huge based on who is tweeting that out and basically the engagement level of their followers. Also, the other addendum I would add to what Claire said on Facebook is that there's also a big difference when you advertise something that exists within the Facebook ecosystem versus running an ad for something that's pointing outside of Facebook. So the former would be something like, I'm Zynga, I want to advertise Farmville. That's very effective. Or I want to build up my fans on my page. That's very effective. So things that I think keep people within the Facebook ecosystem,
That's
I
what's
would actually
amazing
think
to
about
me.
them a little bit differently.
Facebook is convinced, and you're actually pitching this, Facebook has convinced people to spend money to run ads that point to Facebook.
Right. Well,
I mean,
well,
that is why I want to buy stock in
Well,
their IPO.
sort of, right? Because I think it's pointing to Facebook, but to something that you sort of own on Facebook, right? Like
Yeah.
Zynga owns Farmville, and they're the ones that are making money.
You guys
off
are
of it.
drinking the Kool-Aid, aren't you? I don't think we own anything at all. I mean, Facebook to us is a traffic generation mechanism. We didn't get into this in the questions I wanted to, the original stuff, but I don't think of it as my brand there. I think of it as an outpost to pull traffic into TechCrunch. I never want my brand, and maybe I'm a Luddite here the way I'm thinking about it, but I never want my brand to be owned by a company that has its own profit motives that are completely disagree with, my own sort of business model. So
I think that actually is part of what was attracted by Twitter, because Twitter really, if you look at almost all the brands, at least 50 to 60% of what they post are links. I mean, it may be conversation, but they're always putting something in that's driving back. And, Facebook has some of that, but it's not as much the culture, I think, to have, those links as part of the feed. So I think you're right.
Yeah.
But to your point, Mike, I think you're in a very specific kind of business where your business is advertising and a lot of the things that happen on your
no,
site.
we're in business of news.
In the news business, but you
Yeah.
own that media. You need to own that experience. For a lot of companies, especially small
We could
business,
post our stuff on Facebook, and we can't put ads. Well, you can put ads up against it. So, we just don't really trust them to do that. They're not a neutral, third party. Same with Satisfaction. I love the startup. We cover the startup. My friends have started it, but we don't have an experience there because I will go there kicking and screaming. Once I'm there, I know I'm there to stay.
Yeah.
But I don't want my experience to be there because I don't want it there.
And I think it's perfectly valid, and you have enough of a brand and a following where it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But for most businesses are really small, and especially back to your earlier question, they don't have a marketing person.
Right. So they got to think about advertising. I mean, my answer to that was, God, don't advertise. I mean, don't spend money on advertising. Engage in the conversation. Drive free users. They're so much better. And I know it's easy to say when for us we're getting so much attention inbound that it's easy for us to get. We never spend money on advertising.
Yeah.
But these guys, they have to buy users to start. Of course, they're going to have to give up their brand a little bit on these third-party platforms.
I think it also kind of probably depends on this type of site you have. Like, one of the things that I still find amazing is all the record labels are still trying to drive traffic to artist.coms. I don't know how many years we have to go to see that artist.coms, they've never been that interesting. The artists typically don't put up a lot of original content. There's not a lot of value there. And the idea that, these artists, that have, great presences on Twitter and Facebook, that somehow they need to be driving that to an artist.com to build that site seems kind of like an old concept. Now, maybe if they're driving them for a specific promotion or to buy something makes a lot of sense, but building an artist.com identity at this point doesn't make any sense. The artist is the artist brand, and they're just leveraging these different sites to basically.
So we should just give up. I mean, if you're creating a new brand, you might as well just create it on Twitter, on Facebook.
I think it depends. So I think
.com is.
I think a TechCrunch is a
So what's
standalone
the
site. It has
example?
enough. You create valuable content, so you should be driving someone there. And then artist.com, 99 out of 100 of them never update their content.
Exactly.
So why send someone to a site that's a
It's
null
much harder to
experience?
get people to come to you than it is for you to go to them. And so, for example, one of our customers, he's an insurance agent in Georgia. So nobody goes to his website. He's been paying someone $100 every month for the last 5 years.
Yeah, that's
no
a
one
great
goes to his
business.
website.
The guys that do that, yeah. These legacy guys that put up websites in the
You know what?
90s and
Yeah,
continue
they're-
to charge 20.
Exactly.
100,
This guy's been getting gouged. And so we said, look, no one is going to your website. Why don't you just focus on your Facebook page? For them, I mean, obviously it's a very different business than yours. It's been great. He's gotten a lot of leads. He knows that insurance isn't sexy, so people aren't going to wake up every morning and go to his website the way that they would go to TechCrunch. But they're still able to engage when there's a new insurance product, or when they see that someone gets engaged or has a baby, and they know that maybe it's time to sell life insurance. So.
Yeah, I mean, okay. I just, we see every day people like get their Facebook pages deleted accidentally from terms of service. Or the guy Harmon, there's this guy, I forgot his full name, but he had facebook.com/Harmon. The sales team sold it to Harmon International, and they just summarily deleted his page. Now, I got involved and wrote a post, and we've reversed it all, but we're not there for everyone, and it's only funny the first time. And so you're really giving up complete control to somebody who doesn't really care that much about you, especially when you're a small brand and you're never getting any press if they screw you. So I'd be a little more concerned about it than that. You also can't back up your information off of Facebook. They don't allow that information to go off. There are sites that are trying to do that, but they tend to get shut down. Anyway,
It's a fair point.
another question. Right here.
How does the presence of companies or business in these social media networks change the social media networks? Is it in any way like, oh, my mother just joined Facebook, or she just posted something to my wall? How do any of you see the presence of corporations?
I'll say that,
Media transform how people are either using the media or how they view it?
with Facebook, it started to Facebook started to look like Zingaville for a while until they shut down the notification. So, yeah, how does Facebook stay interesting and Twitter and
Well, I think Facebook has done a good job. I mean, there have been some hiccups, but they realize that user growth and user retention is their secret weapon in order to stay relevant. And so I think the opt-in nature of fan pages is a huge one. So if a fan page starts sending you too many updates or too many notifications, well, you'll just stop fanning it or you'll hide it. Similarly, if someone starts spamming you, just an individual salesperson, you can just hide or block that person. So I think it's useful in that sense in terms of being able to have privacy settings and controls that let people define their own experience and opt in for the brands and companies and people that they actually like and then stay away from everything else.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's really just a recognition that people want to interact with both of these entities, but that despite what the Supreme Court says, people think about interacting with people differently than they think about interacting with organizations and companies. And particularly, I think they want to have a higher degree of I'm happy when something shows up unexpectedly from somebody I haven't seen from in a while. I'm sometimes less happy when something shows up from some corporation that I don't feel much of a personal connection to. But if I'm actively seeking out that kind of information, it's fantastically valuable to have it so close and accessible. So it's just a different way of thinking about those interactions. Just making it a bigger space with more entities.
Yeah, I think MySpace was an example where they got it wrong. When they were purchased by Fox and all of a sudden they put up those ginormous ads across their site, I mean, they turned off a lot of users. That was one of many things that they did that, started the Facebook kind of wave of people going there. And then obviously, as you guys mentioned, initially Facebook had all those alerts, and I think finally taking all that stuff that, someone had, bitten you by dragging, all that stuff that started to become extremely spammy. I think taking the spam out of the feed is super important from the tools you mentioned to probably increasing filters as we go along.
It does start to feel like that maybe, a lot of this stuff gets started at the college level, and that Facebook is starting to look a little bit like an office park. And, there's a long history of these social networks eating themselves. And Facebook feels like it's gotten over that hump, but it always kind of feels that way when it's, when MySpace was the top site on the internet. I don't think many people were predicting it was going to have its lunch eaten by an upstart. It'd be interesting to see if something else becomes cool again. We have time for maybe 2 more questions. Let's go here.
I wonder if the panel thinks that social media as a marketing tool will ever be ROI positive, like no-brainer, direct response type. So, especially for a retail brand, or it's not necessarily for TechCrunch, but for maybe for this insurance agent, but for Tide, somebody like that. Because AdWords is pretty, ROI positive for most companies, but it seems like even after hearing everything that's been said today, social media is more of a brand building. It's like taking out an ad in a magazine, but being able to talk from the ad, but still not. It's still sort of a budget you have to engage with people, but it's not ROI positive necessarily. I'm wondering, maybe you all disagree with that, but
Yeah, I
I've
disagree.
never been able to justify in our retail company even filling out the content on our Facebook page relative to the other opportunities we have.
I mean, there's a difference between like ROI positive versus like the best ROI. Like it is ROI positive today. Like the reason why you see all these ads on Facebook, like the belly fat ads and stuff, is those people are making a lot of money.
They run until it's ROI negative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something good, all right.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's
Well,
going to be
Google's exactly the same. I mean, it's a mirror. I mean, all this money going through Google, I mean, sure, some of it's Nordstrom's, but there's, all the same stuff on Google, and same thing. People just run the ads until they're ROI negative.
Yeah. I think part of it also is kind of the nature of what the brand is doing. So the fact that Whole Foods has close to 1 million followers on Twitter, and every time they post an update, they have an opt-in list of 1 million people. That to me is hugely ROI positive. They have
Is that because they did something right on Twitter, or is that because Whole Foods is special and they've always managed their brand appropriately, except for that one thing with the CEO?
Well, I think it's both. I think, yeah.
I mean, no, really, though,
Well,
right?
well, they
You
put
know?
up valuable content. I mean, that, I mentioned that earlier. That if you look at the case example between like Trader Joe's and themselves, they put up stuff that was more relevant. I mean,
wait, not valuable content. Maybe Whole Foods is just special.
Yeah,
Like maybe, all I'm saying is that sometimes, you need to look at the product before you look at the marketing, and maybe the
Right.
product does a lot of the marketing for you.
Yeah.
And so if the insurance company engages in the same level of, conversation, I'm not sure they're going to have the same result, right? So maybe work on your product first.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, disagree if you want. I mean, there's clearly are things you can do on the margin, but sometimes it's just a wonderful product is a wonderful product, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are examples. It's still early, and certainly there's a lot of companies who are still figuring it out. But have you heard of Bonobos? It's a Stanford GSB company. Well, the first year they were in existence, the only advertising that they did was on Facebook. And just from that, they generated a $2 million run rate. And I don't know the exact numbers of how much they spent, but it was completely grassroots, and it grew through word of mouth. And now they're doing extremely well. So I think there absolutely are case studies out there in terms of success. But is it as formulated? Do we know what the science is as well as we do for AdWords? Certainly not.
Do you know how much they spent on Facebook advertising in that first year?
It's on the order of like tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah. But they're both Stanford GSBers.
I think this is also where mobile and some of the location things we're talking about will be increasingly interested, because you can imagine that as the location stuff and mobile progresses, a retailer could run a campaign. Hey, for the next 30 minutes, we're giving 30% off, a pair of pants. The first 30 people that are in get it, and Twitter's talking about things like targeted tweets that don't go out to everyone, that only goes out to someone in a location. If you mix that, with kind of an offer, that obviously becomes very ROI positive. So I think it comes back to, as Michael said, that the product itself has to be good, the content has to be relevant, and the way you're engaging with them. You can't just put up a page and just assume something will happen.
And I also think it dovetails back to Lane's earlier point, where the first era of online marketing was all about the transaction. It was how many clicks, what's the click-through rate, what's the conversion after they looked at my landing page. That's important, but because we have the social graph now and the ability to capture relationships with customers, we can take a longer-term view. And when we're calculating ROI and calculating customer lifetime value, it's not just about their click-through rate that time, but across every time that they're interacting with your web properties or Twitter or Facebook.
Yeah, and so you're starting to see really interesting metrics companies, metrics startups start to come out. It's an interesting one called Kiss Metrics. There's another one called, I'm forgetting it. But there's a lot of interesting ones that are coming out that are trying to do this. How do we understand sort of the value of a customer over time? Not just what's the path that they did down the conversion funnel, but was it the second, the third, or the eighth time that they showed up? And what are the different ways that they've come through, and what was their exposure that they got on other sites or other social networks? So it's a much more holistic view of that customer, and all of that's really valuable. Still about driving people down the funnel.
Everything that they mentioned is a repeat purchase customer, right? Tide, Bonobos, all these Whole Foods especially, it's something where you come back very often. So it seems like the cutting edge of this being more ROI positive might be not a one-time purchase, like a long-term purchase.
I think that's especially well suited. The other use case where we've seen is a lot of our customers are realtors. So you're not going to buy a home every year, at least most people aren't in this environment, but it's strongly a word of mouth referral-based business. And if you have a good experience buying a home with this agent, you're likely to recommend that to your brothers and sisters and friends and neighbors.
So we have 5 minutes left. We can either end a little bit earlier, or if somebody has one killer question that's really going to win them that book, or comment. So your hands up right now means you've got something that the audience is going to really enjoy hearing. Afterwards, they're going to high-five you on the way out of here.
This would have been the question to start with, and that is, some of us have been marketing long before social media came around. What I'm interested in is, how is it changing the basic principles of marketing and how you deal with customers, or is it not just a tactic of how you reach them in a different way?
That should have been asked at the very beginning of the panel. Yeah. That's a Clara question, I think, more than anything. And
I think the fundamental principle of marketing in terms of reaching people, a lot of people, and targeting to them hasn't changed. I think it gets better because of this data that people are sharing about themselves. What does change is what I mentioned in my previous response in terms of online marketing shifting from being transactionally focused to being relationship focused. And that's kind of the short answer.
It's just to me, you can't think of it as anything other than a conversation anymore. It is not one-to-one. It is not one-to-many. It's there. These people can tear you apart or they can carry your message, but I mean,
I guess I'll go out California here for a second and say that I love that the net result of that is that people get to act more human in environments in which they are transacting. And I think that is something that we have actually leached a lot out of our relationships with businesses over the last 50 or 100 years, is the human element as we were working on efficiency. And now I think it's not so much about efficiency, although obviously that's a component, it's about effectiveness. And to me, effectiveness actually means that you need to establish a relationship with someone. And that one of the ways to do that is to expose yourself a little bit more as a human being. So we have this interesting new world that's coming out where we can interact with the employees of companies that matter to us. And that does mean everything from really fantastic interactions to really crappy ones.
Well, at least they're interacting with us, so we better deal with it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's a system that we get to develop around that to me, at the end of the day, just means that we all get to enjoy our lives a little bit more.
Yeah, life is short and we spend so much of it working. So both on the selling side as well as the buying side, I think having the human element, sorry to be like the rah-rah cheery person on the panel, but I really think, even in my own interactions in selling to our customers, I do feel like I've gotten to know prospect X and prospect Y better because I can see pictures of their dog and they can see pictures of mine. I like that.
All right. Final thoughts? 30 seconds? Anything else to say? Then we're getting out of here.
Tied.
I just think.
Right,
I guess what I would leave everyone with is.
Please buy my book.
No.
Who won the book, by the way?
I don't know. Who do you think had the best question?
This is your book. You got. I mean, I have my thoughts.
I
but
forget who asked what.
I knew this was going to happen.
I'm sorry.
I think
Free books for everyone.
I think audience vote. No, we can't. We don't have time to do that. I don't even know how to organize that. I think he gets. To
Okay.
Because he asked the question that we should have been talking about. We could rewind. We'd start with that. And
I agree.
okay. Congratulations.